Good morning, good morning. And I saw in the chat earlier, there's someone from further afield, so good evening in Australia. Thank you so much to everyone for coming, for getting a ticket and registering. We have an amazing morning lined up for you. We have some fantastic women on our panel, Janelle, Karen, and Liz, who we're going to be hearing from shortly. So before we get started, I just wanted to say a few housekeeping rules quickly. So everyone's camera is turned off and your microphone is also mute as well. We're going to be doing a Q&A, so feel free to send in your questions throughout the morning, throughout the event. Questions will go in the Q&A box and they will be read out by myself and directed to the panel or to all three ladies at the end, towards the end, I should say, of the event. Also, if you wanted to ask a question, if you click the raise your hand button, our wonderful virtual host, Laurie, will unmute you and you'll be able to speak. Okay, so I hope everyone's comfortable. Get your snacks or your hot beverages or your water, whatever tickles your fancy. I see Liz has a hot drink there. I have my tea as well. So just wanted to start by introducing myself, a little bit of my story and why I wanted to put on an event like this, tell you a bit more about SANS, who are supporting the event, and then you'll hear from our panelists who will introduce themselves as well. So my name is Tara Alexis. I'm an actress and a writer. And 11 years ago, I experienced a late miscarriage. And my world was completely turned upside down. I went through a process of counselling recommended by the hospital for about a year and a half. I was in counselling for, and then I was doing very well in my journey. And then 2 years ago, 2019, Mother's Day, I received a text message from my sister wishing me a happy Mother's Day, and I was completely floored. I spent the rest of the day in bed. I was so upset. I was crying. And I was really taken by surprise at how I was affected by that message. And it was later that I realized that actually I was craving some form of acknowledgement of being a mother and just wanting something from people on that day as well. So then I got thinking, having spoken to people, they were saying there might be other women who feel the same as well. So at the start of last year, 2020, I decided to put on an afternoon tea for other women who have experienced a miscarriage, late miscarriage, stillbirth, or neonatal loss. But unfortunately, COVID happened. So that event didn't go ahead. But I did get lots of feedback from people in the meantime that this was something that they wanted to talk about. And a lot of women did actually say, I remember seeing posts on social media, actually, no one's talking about this. I want to talk about this. So then I had a very nice conversation with a lady from the SANS support group, the West London one, called Paula. And she was encouraging me to get in touch with SANS and see if they might be able to help do something. So I got in touch with SANS, and then they suggested putting something on during Baby Loss Awareness Week, which is today. So that's a bit about my story. I'll tell you a bit more about that as well. There are a few charities out there that do things to kind of support and help women who are bereaved. So a bit about SANS. SANS is the leading stillbirth and neonatal death charity in the UK, and they exist to reduce the number of babies dying and to ensure that anyone affected by baby loss receives the best possible care and support for as long as they need it. SANS was founded by bereaved parents in 1978 who found that there was no access to support following the deaths of their babies. So SANS provides bereavement support services both nationally through its free helpline, mobile app, and online community. And they work in partnership with healthcare professionals, trusts, health boards, and a range of training programs, bereavement care resources to ensure that all bereaved parents and families receive the best possible care and support. So I'm going to hand over to our panelists now. We'll start with Janelle, who is an ambassador for SANS. Do you just want to introduce yourself, a bit of your story and what you do in relation to women and baby loss?
Hello everyone, my name is Janelle Aldred and I'm an ambassador for SANS. So I had a stillbirth when I was 19 years old, which was almost 20 years ago now, so quite far on in my journey. And the past couple of years working with SANS, I'm really passionate about advocacy for mums and also how to think about we bring more different kinds of stories into the narrative around baby loss, because there tends to be a kind of person that people tend to focus on, but actually baby loss happens to so many women, and actually it's good to see all of those voices represented in the narrative. So that's something that I also work with SANS on and I'm very, very passionate about. I'm a communications director. I've just released a book. So I think I try to weave things and narratives around compassion and how we can have better conversations around tough issues like this. So I've got many, many thoughts on many, many things, but I'm sure we'll hear those as we go through, but that's a bit about me.
Thank you, Janelle. And Karen, do you want to tell us a bit about yourself and what you do as well?
Yeah, good morning, everyone. My name is Karen Juguna. I am the bereavement midwife at Lewisham Hospital, which is part of Lewisham and Greenwich NHS. I'm here with my colleague Liz. I have been a midwife for 11 years and mainly worked on labour ward. And I've been in the bereavement post since March. But while working on labour ward, I looked after many families who experienced a loss. I have a passion for this women and just seeing how we can improve the care and support them and signpost them to the resources that we need, and also to be able to break the silence and talk about pregnancy loss more and how it affects those people who unfortunately find themselves in this situation. And thank you for having me, Tara, and I'm excited about the conversations that will be held on this panel.
Thank you, Karen. And then Liz, do you want to tell us about yourself as well and your involvement with women?
Hi everyone, my name is Liz Ware and I am the bereavement midwife at Queen Elizabeth Hospital, Karen's colleague, as part of the Lewisham and Greenwich NHS Trust. I feel very privileged to be here with Tara. The drive for me is I've been a midwife for 12 years, and my drive and my passion is with women and families that have suffered loss of any gestation. And it's such a privilege to be part of their lives and their journey. And actually, it's a real privilege meeting their babies, because that's not what many people get to do, and spend time with them making memories. So today for me is all about no matter on your gestation, every pregnancy and every baby counts.
Definitely, thank you. And I love that you said that as well, that it counts, because sometimes I think there can be a tendency to kind of think that it's not as important or it doesn't mean as much, but I think it means what it means to you, and it's a very personal thing. So I don't think one should discount themselves at all, regardless of the gestation, as you've just said. Okay, so we're going to get things started. The first thing I wanted to talk about, which we've kind of already touched about, breaking the silence, is taboo in 2021. Now, when I had my loss 11 years ago, I'm going to sound old now, social media wasn't as kind of big and popping as it is right now. And it wasn't really spoken about. I don't remember hearing other people, that many people, I think I can probably count on one hand, one lady, maybe two, who came to me and said, I've had this experience as well. So why, it might sound like an obvious question, but I don't think it is. Why do you think it is hard for people to talk about it, to talk about baby loss? That's to everyone.
Yeah, I personally think that people have difficulty with it because they have a fear of judgment, and they worry if there's any blame factor for them, if people are going to, think they've done something wrong and the pregnancy's ended. And I think people are also frightened of what to say to people. So women and families don't want to put other people in that position. It's almost like they're protecting other people around them. I don't know what anyone else thinks, but
no, yeah, I think it's really interesting because when 20 years ago, no one was talking about this and Twitter wasn't even invented. So it was definitely a long way away. And at the time, in terms of resources, Sam's had something in the hospital that I was given by the midwives, but there was no sense of bereavement support, etc. So one thing that I think is good is that things have moved on a lot from there. And so I think that is very, very positive. I think we still live in this very strange time where life's like a circle, right? And we live it in community. And I think there's something where people think about talking about baby loss is upsetting, especially for other people who are pregnant. And so I think because in the world, there will always be people in the zeitgeist, in your zeitgeist, who are on the other end of that journey. I think there becomes a very tricky dynamic that's very hard to talk about, that actually, one, you're trying to protect other people's feelings because we do know it's awkward. People don't know what to say. People don't know what to say, so they don't ask, kind of sometimes shun people unintentionally because of their own, inability to grapple with the subject. And then we have other people who are pregnant. So I think it's about recognizing there's a lot of guilt going on in the whole cycle. And so this is why I find it really interesting. Sorry, going to get onto my ramble topic, but we often put trigger warnings around baby loss. And I always find that really interesting and sometimes a bit sad, because if someone's dad dies, if their mom dies, if their partner dies, no one says trigger warning, family death. But when it comes to babies, we're still in this space. And I understand it on some level, because for some people it is very triggering. You're going on with your day and you see this, but you're also going on with your day and you see a scan picture, you see a pregnant person, you see a baby announcement, you see a baby shower. So I think we need to get to the space where we are talking about it more, because I still think it's the last taboo of grief. But I think it's about, as a society, I think we need to mature into a space where we say baby loss and pregnancy are triggering for lots of people for lots of different reasons. Infertility is not part of this conversation, but that is another reason why some people find pregnancy hard to hear. And so I think we have to understand that baby loss is a loss like other losses, and it should be allowed to be talked about in the same sense, because my dad's alive shouldn't mean that someone else can't talk about their father dying, and the same goes vice versa. So I think we need to keep talking about it more and more and more, so that people can get comfortable with hearing about it as a part of life. Sorry, that was very long.
That's okay, because you reminded me, it's so interesting that you said that, the trigger warning, because we're actually going to share a conversation later on that I had with a mother who experienced loss. And when preparing, I thought to myself, actually, do I need to say a trigger warning? Do I need to say to people this conversation contains sensitive details and materials? But then at the same time, as you've just said, do we need to do that? I mean, in the era now, where you can see almost anything on the internet, of all levels of sensitivity that might be upsetting, do we still need to say, oh, I'm about to talk about the loss of my baby, you might be upset?
And I would be interested to hear people's, in the Q&A comments, how they feel about talking about these things, and do they put a trigger warning or not? Because, yeah, I think it's something that we need to, talk about.
It's interesting, Janelle, because we run, well, obviously recently because of COVID, we've been running virtual training packages online and just updating people on bereavement care and different processes that happen that they need to know about, any updates. And I had a conversation with a member of staff that I did put a trigger warning on that training session. And my point about that, and I'd love to hear other people's thoughts, but if you're working in the clinical area, as I am today, there is no trigger warning to a lady walking in, losing her baby. There is no trigger warning. So we have to be in tune with anything that could happen at any time. So I felt that I shouldn't have to trigger warn at training session for professionals. And I don't know what anybody else thinks about that, but I thought it's actually, it just happens out of the blue. And you know, how prepared are you going to be for that?
Yeah, I agree with what Janelle and Liz are saying around the conversations around baby loss and pregnancy loss. And I think for me, the question is, how do we even keep the conversation going beyond Baby Loss Awareness Week. If you look at the statistics, it's staggering that, for example, 23 million women experience miscarriage all over the world. And so why are we not shouting about it the same way we talk about other issues that are affecting people globally? But there's also the issue of, for example, how do we empower women and staff? How do we create that space where people can talk about, have these conversations comfortably? Because from my experience, I have found that actually women do want to have these conversations, but perhaps the healthcare professions are not, they don't feel equipped and empowered to be able to hold those conversations with women. And so training is an important aspect from a health professional. And also just knowing sometimes it's okay not to know what to say. Because sometimes I think we feel that we always have to say something. And by feeling that, you feel that space, because you feel so uncomfortable not saying something, you end up filling that space with perhaps things when you look back, you think, oh gosh, I shouldn't have said that. But I have learned that actually that women understand there's nothing we can do to change what has happened, but the women expect that we see them, we see them and we hear them, and it's perfectly okay to even just say, I am sorry, I don't know what to say, how can I support you? Because I think as well, if you look at our profession, the healthcare profession is one that people present and you diagnose a problem and you say, this is what we need to do to make it okay. But in this situation, you're faced with a situation where actually you cannot change what has happened, but you can hold that space. And how do we hold that space? And how do we support these women in these conversations and make it okay for the health and the women, the healthcare workers and the women to be able to have these conversations? So this conversation is broader than, for example, this week is Baby Loss Awareness Week, hence my blue and pink colors. But thinking beyond, how do we keep these conversations in people's minds? And I think there needs to be a shift in society, and if you like, in some of the policies that are developed by companies around these conversations.
Thank you, Karen. I've just been looking in the Q&A and I can see a few people are saying that they agree and that they don't think a trigger warning is necessary, and that's definitely challenged me. And maybe, I think someone said it earlier, maybe me trying to protect other people and other feelings, actually I shouldn't be doing that. And I was reminded of something, very awkward situation that happened maybe about 2 months after my loss. And just thinking about it, I thought to myself, if there was an openness, or more of an openness, to be able to talk about it, if it wasn't such a taboo, then this might not have happened. So basically, my amazing sister took me away to Newcastle for like a weekend in a really nice hotel, and we went to a spa, and she booked me in for a massage. And on the forms that you get, where you have to list all of your health conditions, one of the forms said, have you recently given birth within whatever amount of time? And because my miscarriage was a late one, labor was induced, so I had given birth. I didn't know how to answer the question, so I just said yes, gave it to the masseuse, and then she had a conversation with me about having babies, and like, you've just had your baby, oh, this is amazing, you know, what's your baby like? What did you have? And I said, a boy, because I did have a boy. And it was just so awkward. And it was like, I didn't feel I could say to her, well, yes, clinically, I have just given birth. However, my baby died. And I think if it wasn't such a taboo, then maybe it would have been, I don't know, it's just that awkward situation could have been avoided.
I agree. And I've had many of those awkward situations. And part of the issue, I think, with why the numbers are not changing as well around stillbirth is because of the taboo and the not talking about it. So if people don't even know what to look for, in terms of in their own pregnancy, because towards the end of my pregnancy, there were some signs that things were not going right. But because I didn't really know what I should be looking for, I couldn't even advocate for myself. So another reason why I think we need to talk more about, because in some cases it is unavoidable, you know, it happens, but in cases where it is avoidable, unless you know really what you're looking for, I know we talk about 10 kicks and that is helpful, but also talking about that a bit more, I even noticed that talk has kind of gone a bit quiet. So talking about it doesn't just help us who've been through, I think it also helps to prevent, in some cases, other people from coming through. And I don't know if you mind me reading, Tara, one of the comments that says people
That's okay.
by the wrong response. Someone said, don't worry, one day you'll get your turn. People assume I've never been pregnant because I don't have children. So when people at work are having conversations around, oh, and one day you'll know what it's like, and you always go through your mind, do I make this really awkward for you right now by saying to you, actually, I was 40 weeks and 10 days pregnant, had a full-term birth, and actually my daughter's dead? Or do I suck that uncomfortableness up myself, swallow it, feel emotional, get really tense, and you probably think I'm really strange? And I think it's because we just are so used, this is like the one area where people never think. If someone says, oh, my mum, but that was years ago, you might say, oh, she's still with us, and that would be perfectly fine. But when it comes to this, no one ever asks those questions, and that's never on a form. And so I think it is about not making people uncomfortable on purpose, but sometimes I've just gotten comfortable with saying, actually, I have been pregnant, but my daughter died. Because actually that other person as well needs to understand that you cannot make assumptions about people. And it's the assumptions that are actually hurtful and harmful.
Thank you. And a quick question for Karen and Liz. From your point of view, in the hospitals on the medical side, can you see the progression and the change with people talking about it more? How is it from that point of view?
I mean, I think people are more open to talking about baby loss overall, but many professionals are still very uncomfortable around it as well, because they're frightened. They're mainly frightened of responding or reacting in a way that they may seem that is not appropriate, rather than just like Karen said earlier, rather than just going in the room and saying, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. And just even your non-verbal cues have more value than doing nothing at all. And but still people are uncomfortable around it. Not because they don't want to be, but because they're frightened of upsetting or making something in their eyes worse, like it could get any worse for them. We also have to remember that we have to separate the grief, because actually it's not our grief, and it's really important that we realise that we are there as support for those women and families, and not take on their grief. It's not okay to make it about yourselves, and I think a lot of people struggle with that because they take on board that person's grief, and you have to try and obviously give as much empathy and sympathy and support as you can without taking it on yourself. And I think when you get to that point, you have so much more to give those people. In terms of, it's interesting because if we go back a few years to a situation that happened to me, so I'm lucky enough to have 3 children, and my second pregnancy, I had twins, and I didn't know I was having twins. And it was when the scans were terrible. They looked like an old X-ray machine, you know, it was just like antiquated, and I'm not that old, I promise you, but things have changed so quickly, and I started bleeding, and I called up to the hospital. I wasn't a midwife then. I called the hospital. I said, I don't know what to do. They sent the community midwife to visit me, because she lived in the same street. So she came to visit me, and I'd miscarried one of the twins. The other one went to full term and everything was fine, but they just cleared up and they left, and nothing further was said to me ever. So I think what's reassuring and comforting is that we have got past that stage, and that we give our best to women, and we will talk about it. We still have a lot of work to do, though, I feel. Karen, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree with Liz totally, and hence my comment earlier around training and support for staff. And I think one of the things that I say, especially us being a midwife, is bereavement care is on the other end of the spectrum of what we would normally do. So you do find there's a lot of staff who are uncomfortable about having these conversations. And even just, for example, sometimes I'll be at work and there's a woman who's been admitted, and you can see my colleagues are frantically trying to get me up to see her. And it's just because they don't feel equipped to speak to these women and to support them. And so one of the things that, well, Liz and I do, and especially this week, Baby Loss Awareness Week, we're running an education bus in the trust throughout the week. And again, it's supporting staff to have these very uncomfortable conversations with women. And I mean, I don't know about you, Liz, I don't always know what to say when I'm going into a room, because people grieve differently, and it just depends on what's happening on the other side of the door, which you will not know until you get into the room. And I think that fear is what perhaps most of my colleagues run away from. But like I said, what can you say? What can you say to actually change the situation? Absolutely nothing. But you can be there for that woman. You can make her feel seen. You can make her feel heard, and you can try and just incorporate some of the things that she wants into the care that you plan. So my passion again is around staff training and getting people to a position where they're comfortable to be in that space, hold that space with women who've had a loss.
Okay, and just before we round up this topic, I have a question for you regarding moving forward and breaking the silence. What can we do? What can a mother of angel do? What can a mum who have experienced loss do to help break the silence? And then what can people who know women who have experienced loss, what can they do to help break the silence and the taboo around it?
I think one, in our own way, as people feel comfortable, and I think a lot of it is about comfortability, because at different stages of your own journey, you will feel more or less comfortable about sharing with people. But I think it is about having those tough conversations sometimes, especially with people close to you first, and even close colleagues at work, and just say, you know, this is how I feel about this. This is how I feel a bit silenced, and you know, and I would like to talk about it where appropriate. Can you help me? You know, just to have these conversations with me. And then I think the other thing is, and I've seen a lot of women doing it courageously, is just kind of sharing when it happened. I know that Chrissy Teigen got a lot of flack when she shared it on social media that she'd had this late miscarriage. But I think that when she did share it, it enabled a whole load of other women to say, yes, that happened to me. And I think when you're ready, when moments like that come, sometimes it's a good moment to say, do you know what, actually, I'm 1 in 4. This happened to me. And as someone said in the chat to the host and panelists, sometimes we just have to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sometimes I think, gosh, you know, it's 20 years on, maybe you should just let other people talk about it. But the single reason why I continue to talk about it is because I know that, one, I'm in a space where I'm comfortable to share because it's a long time ago. And two, every time I share, without someone comes and tells me that it happened to them too. So I think it's just as we become more comfortable to share our stories, and this is a perfect week to do it, to kind of say, hey, it happened to me, and you may see me talking about it from time to time because I want to raise awareness. So I think it's just kind of leaning into it and growing that muscle of them talking about it.
Thank you. Did you want to comment, Liz?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think it's important for everybody, you know, we need to use social media as a positive platform. And whilst there is lots of negativity behind social media, it's also a brilliant place to be heard and seen and support. And, you know, every time you talk about what's happened to you, you're also carrying the memory of your baby on. And that's really important, that you can do that for the rest of your life. There's no, just because it was a long time ago, it doesn't matter how long ago it was. And I think every time you share, you're also sharing the memories that you have. So I think it's important to just talk to each other and really advocate for each other. And as professionals, we need to advocate for our women as well. That's really important for Karen and I to carry on promoting advocacy in the clinical area.
Thank you. Sorry, was you going to say something, Karen?
Yeah, I was. And I think for me, I'll probably look at this from a wider perspective and think about how do we change the laws to acknowledge that all life matters. For example, if you look at miscarriages, is the most common pregnancy loss. 1 in 4 women in the UK will experience a miscarriage. This affects quarter of a million people just in the UK. So I think that this needs to be a wider discussion around what are some of the laws that are put in place to acknowledge that all lives matter. And as a society, we have a responsibility. And when I say society, I'm talking about companies and some of the policies that they put in place to acknowledge that pregnancy loss is devastating. Women need to be supported. And I think by doing that, we will increase that awareness, because it will be an ongoing conversation which should be happening anyway, and not just have a week dedicated to pregnancy loss, which is good. But like I said, just to keep that conversation in the minds of society, whether the law changes or not around this, who knows, but certainly as a society and companies, I think it's time to review some of the policies that we have that support women who have had pregnancy loss, and that, like I said, will create awareness around the issue.
Thank you. So the theme for Baby Loss Awareness the week is well-being, and the theme for today is looking after yourself. So I wanted us to think and talk about that a bit as well. We have a clip which Laurie is going to play for us shortly. Not sure if you're ready yet. It's from a mother called Abeli. We'll be sharing her story later today as well. We've just got a clip regarding looking after yourself that we're going to play for you. Okay, so while we wait for that clip, is it coming? Yeah, so what advice would you give to women regarding looking after themselves, women who have experienced loss?
I think with regards to looking after yourself, for me, it has been a journey, and quite a few what some people might call setbacks. So sometimes I would think I was doing fine, and then something would happen and I would realize, oh, actually, I'm not okay. And so I think the number one thing in looking after yourself is about taking things at your own pace. And when you do feel low, so I know that this week will be a tough week in that sense, because baby loss is everywhere. So for me, I think it's about just recognizing that this week I'm not going to take on as much as I would in other weeks, because I'm going to need more time to rest, to process. Leading up to the anniversary, I tend to find that I get very, very emotional. And it's just for me in those times, not taking on big stuff. Like, for instance, this week, a friend did some crazy stuff. And she was like, I just really need to talk to you about it. And I was just like, no, because I don't have emotional capacity. So I think the main thing is just recognizing when my emotional capacity is lower and higher, and taking care of myself in terms of the other things that I'm doing around that time, and being happy to say no to things, because it doesn't matter if it was 20 years ago, it still affects me sometimes. Equally, other things like when friends are pregnant, I think sometimes that can be a really tricky time sometimes, especially if they're very close to you, and you've recently gone through a loss. So sometimes I just put really clear boundaries with people, like, I'm really happy for you, but right now I can't be that friend to you. So I'd prefer if you maybe didn't send me scanned pictures or other things. And so I think the biggest thing for me about self-care is choosing yourself and standing up for yourself. Even when people love you, sometimes it's not intentional, but it can be encroaching on your mental health and how you feel. So I just try to create that force field I think it's more than bubble baths and candles. They're nice, but I think actually it's about creating that space in your mind to take care of you and to give yourself space.
Definitely. I think we've got the clip ready now.
So the theme for Baby Loss Awareness Week this year is looking after yourself and well-being. What did you do to look after yourself during your time of grief?
With with Sapphire, my first miscarriage, I lived in the gym. I literally just lived in the gym. It wasn't something that I planned to do, but her dad did say to me, why don't you just go to the gym? And first of all, I thought he was being quite insulting. I thought, was he trying to say fat? Like, why should I? And he was like, no, just go to the gym. Like, just do it, just go, because he's a gym body. So I suppose from his point of view, he was just like the gym's the best place to be. So I spent a good part of a year in the gym. I got a personal trainer and I worked out non-stop. I was in the gym every single day, and it wasn't to lose weight, which obviously did happen because you're building muscle, but it was just so nice to plug out all the noise around me and just run and just to be by myself. I used to walk to the gym, walk home, work out, come home, eat, work out. And it just became my thing. And do you know what? I have recommended it to every single person that's lost a child to just go to the gym. Everyone that's trying to have a baby, that's trying to get their body ready to have a baby, I've always said to everyone, just go to the gym. It's not to lose weight. It's that weight loss is a byproduct, but it just centers you and it just clears your mind. And even if you start crying, I mean, you can just pretend it's sweat, but there's just something in being in that gym, because nobody cares about what you're doing in the gym. If you go to a gym, not necessarily a health club, although I do love my health clubs, it's about just breaking that sweat, and just any kind of anger you have, any kind of upset you have, any kind of hurt, you can literally just run it out, or you can swing it out with a kettlebell or whatever it is, and you just feel so good for it when you leave.
Thank you, Laurie, and thank you to Abeli as well. We'll be hearing a bit more of her story later. The thing that I thought interesting about the physical exercise, I know everyone says, and it is scientifically proven, that exercise releases endorphins, which kind of makes you feel better and increases your mood. I literally do not remember doing any physical exercise for quite a while. And the thing that was conflicting is that I had this weight that I wanted to lose and felt I needed to lose. I didn't go full term, I went to 5 months, but I still physically started to show. And then after my loss, I was depressed, and I ate and I put more weight on as well. So I had this weight that I wanted to lose. And sometimes I joke to myself about looking after myself, because at the time, I think it's a cultural thing as well, where other Black women might suggest that you braid your hair or you wear a weave when pregnant. And I had a weave in, and I remember joking because there was no way I combed my hair. So thank God I had a weave in. I wasn't combing my hair. I remember when my sister would come round to look after me and I would go to have a shower, I would just turn the shower on, sit on the toilet and cry. So there was no looking after myself on the mental side or on the physical side as well. But it definitely is important to do.
Absolutely, Tara, and I agree with you. So one of the things some of the advice I give my women is just to get them to think about perhaps some of the things that they enjoy doing, and physical exercise is one of them. And I can understand sometimes that's the last thing that you want to do, but simple things like just even going out for a walk, because sometimes you have cases where the woman doesn't even want to leave the house, and so just going out for a walk and engaging in perhaps community support. Some people get their strength from faith-based support. So it's understanding where do you get your strength from, and perhaps trying to engage with that for your emotional well-being. Some women don't want to talk to anyone about it, like, Janelle was saying, sometimes you just want to shut down, or you just want to talk about somebody who knows what you've been through. And there has been instances where I've said to one of my women, do you want to go for a coffee? And perhaps that's probably realized they've not been out of the house, they don't want to do anything, and just going out with them and having a coffee half an hour. By the time you finish, they say, I actually feel much better. So I think it's just understanding what works for you, and that's very different for everybody, but also signposting women to organizations like SANS, Miscarriage Association, Tommy's. They have very, very, very good support groups that can help. And just being able to talk about what you have been through with a professional, I have found that that has helped some of my women.
I agree with everything Karen said. The only little ditty I was going to add to that was I also say to my women that it's very important that you take time to just be with your own thoughts. You don't have to rush to do anything. So a lot of people report that, you know, they're afraid to go out and exercise, and although exercise is a great thing, they're afraid to face the neighbours, face walking into someone asking about the pregnancy. It's such a massive thing for someone to leave the house, particularly on their own. And so, you know, sometimes we talk about how the coping strategies beyond leaving the house for the first time. Put your headphones in. You can nod and wave at someone, and you can walk on, because you don't want to feel an obligation to explain yourself until you're ready. And I think it's important that you have that time to talk when you're ready to do it, and yeah, with no pressure.
Are there any kind of mental or kind of emotional advice that you can give or that you can think of with regards to looking after yourself? So Liz, I think it's really good that you acknowledge that actually leaving the house for the first time just after a loss can be a really difficult thing, and also that it's okay to be alone with your thoughts first of all as well. I actually think that's a way. It's almost like safeguarding yourself, but actually that is a way to look after yourself. So any other kinds of advice or any other ways or anything that you could recommend or suggest? We've been seeing everything in the chat and the Q&A, so just thank you to everyone for writing in. We will definitely be addressing your questions. I did manage to see that someone was saying that they would go on evening walks, which I think was really nice. I love to walk and see scenery and just kind of reflect and think. Is there anything else that you would recommend or things that you know your ladies do?
Well, I mean, one of my ladies signed up for an evening yoga class in the park. And obviously that was all started because of COVID. But actually it's something that's carried on. And she doesn't engage with anybody because obviously it's a thought processing therapy, and it includes meditation. And she finds she doesn't need to go and explain or do anything. She goes, she participates, and she comes away. And she's found that really, really helpful. You know, even keeping it down to absolute basics, you know, take your time to have a bath, take your time to listen to some music, take your time to just have silence, take your time to allow people to talk to you, talk about your baby. If that's what you want to do, talk about your baby, because anybody will listen to you that is close enough to you, and those close enough to you will also understand your cues when you want to and when you don't. And I think that's important, that we all acknowledge that it should be led by the women and the families, the partners, what's right for them in the moment.
Just to add on that, one of the things that I speak to my women about is mindfulness, and just staying in the moment and understand what is happening, and accepting that right here, right now, this is where I am, without having too much to manage about how am I going to feel tomorrow or the day after, and understanding as well that grief is a process, and it's not, when you talk about the 5 stages of grief, people think it's actually linear, and you expect there's the denial, then acceptance, and for women who have people who have gone through this and have shared their experiences, there's an understanding that actually that's not how it happens, that you could be absolutely fine 1 minute and the next minute you're in absolute pieces. So it's understanding that it's a process, and just encouraging women just to take one moment at a time. I say to my women, you will never forget. It's not one of those things when I say give it time. The give it time part is not for you to forget, but as time goes by, you learn to carry it differently, and you feel other things in your, you start to do other things in your life, but it doesn't mean that you forget. And I think that is really, really important for women to understand that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say, and someone's messaged, it's, you know, I cried rivers for weeks and weeks and weeks. I mean, for like 6 weeks at one point, just sat on my sofa and I just cried every day. And I think there's something about life that wants to force us to move on to the next stage always. It wants us to move on to the next thing. And like you say about the 5 stages of grief, they're like not linear. So it's not like this thing of, okay, well, I've passed this stage now, so now I'm going to be better. You know, when I was 19, and I remember telling myself, okay, I'm going to give myself a year, because I was 19 and I didn't know, and I had no idea how this journey was going to be, because I'd never seen anyone go through it. So I think if it's the first time or the second time, every time you go through it, okay, if it's, for some people it's 3 times, 4 times now, you've never been at this stage where you've been through this thing 4 times. And I think we have to have the acknowledgement of our humanity, in that this is like a big thing with a massive emotion attached, massive emotional loss. And like someone said, now all you have is memories. And I think the thing for me was, when you're pregnant, your whole mind starts to shift about what your life is going to be with this baby in your life. And when you lose that baby, all of your plans immediately change. Everything that you'd bought, you don't need that now. The cot, you don't need. The baby shower, wish you never had it. And so I think it is about really allowing yourself to go through that process of a very real grief that is very, very consuming, because when you carry a child, you are bringing something to life, you are growing that thing, and all of a sudden it's like a stop. And I don't think there's anything that can prepare you for that, even if you've been through it before. And when I think about how for years and years, my biggest fear was getting into a relationship, getting pregnant, and potentially going through that again. And it's a very real fear where I felt like I just couldn't exhale. And someone put in the chat that they just lost their baby 2 weeks ago. And honestly, my heart goes out to you, because when it's raw and fresh and everything is triggering, if you don't mind, there's a book that I read that the other day. It's called A Bump in the Road, and it's about baby loss. And there's a chapter where she says, happy for you, but heartbroken for me. And I think that's something that I try to express to people. And I know you're saying that your friends are overcompensating. And I think it's just about saying to them, I'm really happy for you. I'm heartbroken for me. We all need some space. I need the space from you. You probably need the space from me. And so let's just come back together when we're ready, if that changes. And I think it is a consuming grief. And we just have to acknowledge that, in a sense, when it first happens, but it doesn't stay that way forever. I can absolutely testify to that. You do come through, and as Karen said, you learn to process it in a different way, where it doesn't affect everything you do and your mood every day, all day. But that is an absolute process. And I think, as someone said, no one cap fits all. Some people get straight back into life, have another baby. Some people are terrified, do not want to get pregnant again. Some people are in the middle, and it takes time. So I think it is about understanding you, understanding if you need help, if you need professional help, and for longer. Some people can talk to friends, but I think it's an absolutely personal journey. Never feel bad if you sit on the sofa and cry river for weeks. You will one day stop crying, and then you might cry about it again 10 years down the line unexpectedly. It's all okay. I think the main thing for me has been continuing to move forward. And I think that has been the thing that I've always kept in my mind, that I still want to live life, because there's still a life to be lived. And if you're still here and have breath, there's more for you to do. And so I have taken that pain and used it as fuel, but the pain was very, very real and crippling for a long time. And so don't ever think that it's not, but you will one day not cry every day, I promise you.
Thank you. And literally, Janelle, what you just described about getting through the journey, being okay, and then years later crying was what happened to me. I was doing okay in my journey. And then 2 years ago, Mother's Day, one text message, I spent the rest of the day in bed in tears. I avoided my phone. And I also saw somebody in the comments talk about avoidance, which is definitely a tactic that I can relate to. And having spoken to other people who have experienced loss, there was a mother I spoke to a while ago who said every Mother's Day she goes away. She goes out of the UK because she didn't say she wants to avoid the day, but that is the behavior. That's what she's doing. Thank you again to everyone for your questions. We're going to be coming up to the Q&A now. I just wanted to kind of do a bit of a swerve and link in another topic and then go into our Q&A, because I can see quite a few people are asking about work. So I wanted to ask the panel, how can you look after yourself in the work environment? And then we'll lead on to the Q&A. But I know work can be very tricky. And I remember I'm an actress. So literally I was newly graduated from drama school, was thinking, yes, I'm going to, go all the way. And then I had my loss, and then things changed, and I was temping at the time. So I had to work. Work wasn't even on my mind. I wasn't even thinking about that. The temping just stopped. And then when I got on my feet again, I started working part-time in an estate agent's. And I remember at the time, Amanda Holden, the actress, had experienced her loss. And a colleague turned to me in the office and said, Tara, can you believe Amanda Holden just had a loss? And I was thinking, so have I. Maybe you should say something, Tara. Maybe you should share yours. But I didn't. I kept it quiet because I didn't know how to talk about that in the workplace. Talking to my sister, talking to my friends, okay. But in the workplace, I didn't know. Is there any comments or any advice or?
I think we're very privileged in healthcare, and in the maternity department, you can imagine if one of your colleagues has a loss and then they have to come back to this kind of workplace, that must bring really so many challenges. And obviously we're it's a very female orientated working environment. And so there are many colleagues that have suffered loss of all gestations. And thankfully and fortunately, we are all very giving, and they are given time, support, and everything they need. And everybody kind of knows how to approach them when they come back. Everyone acknowledges everything that, what they've been through. They're often cared for here by us. And so it's very different for them than returning to, say, a corporate sort of workplace where people may not feel comfortable with talking about baby loss of any kind. So I think from our perspective, from obviously where Karen and I sit with this, is we're very fortunate in our setting. But I know for sure that isn't the case. So in the last year, where it has seemed as if we've had an increase in baby loss during the COVID pandemic, that it has been, feedback from women has said it's been easier to return to work because they've been working from home. So they haven't had to walk into a workplace and feel vulnerable and exposed and talked about. So they have found it easier. But I don't know if that is the case now they're returning and how they're going to feel, because we know there's no shelf life for grief. And at some point they're going to face that situation. But at the moment, that's the feedback I've had. I don't know if Karen's received anything else.
Perhaps the only thing I could add is us as professions and how we also look after ourselves. And like Liz says, we are privileged that we have options where we ourselves can have supervision with external organizations to to support us, and be there for the women, and also we tend to do debrief for staff who look after women, and just talk through it, and sometimes support for me looks like just picking the phone and calling Liz and just chatting for like 5 minutes, or going over to the site and having a cup of coffee, and again just to debrief, because we are aware that yes, we have to be professionals, but also our emotions can be impacted by the work that we are doing. And so I'm very aware that for me, I need to look after myself as well, so that I can support the women that I look after. But we're very good in debriefing and making sure that we are supporting staff, and that is very important.
So I worked in an office when I had my stillbirth, and it was a mixed thing. And I know obviously it was a long time ago, things have moved on, but not really in some ways. And I just saw someone said they went back to work after 4 weeks, they're pressured by their employer. I went back to work after 6 weeks, and that was purely a financial decision, because although you do still get the statutory maternity leave, I think in the end I can't remember what it was, but anyway, the money goes down to be a small amount, because you don't get the child benefit top up and all of those things if you had a live birth. And so I think one of the reasons why I love working with SANS is they are working on a toolkit for workplaces to help workplaces have someone in the office, kind of like a mental health first aider. And I think wherever you work, I would be encouraging your employers to sign up for this, even if it might be too late for you. I think I would definitely feed back to HR, this is something that should be done. They run taster sessions and all sorts, and we're doing a live this week around workplace as well. I think workplaces, again, I just don't think many people don't know how to deal with it unless someone in your human resources has actually been through something similar. I think you will find that they are just totally at a loss at how to have the conversation with you. And I think it's a hard one, because again, you might have to lead that conversation, even if though you're not in a space to, because unfortunately the resources are just not there. So I think there's one of two things if you are in this situation currently. I would, one, go to the SANS website, I'll get the link and I'll post it in the chat, and say there's a workplace resource for people bereaved by baby loss. Someone in HR needs to read this, then come and have a conversation with me. And then I think the other thing to do is, as well, people like SANS have lots of information about what you're entitled to and money, because I think the main reason people go back is around money more than any other reason. I very rarely is it around readiness. I think it's often around the cash. And so I think it's about being informed about what your rights are in that situation. Because I went back to work so soon, I was then signed off in like 8 days later, and then was offered another 6 weeks on my sofa because I just was not ready. There were also other people pregnant at work at the same time as me. And then there was all this thing, they were bringing their baby in to show everyone and all of these things. So I think it is about, as unfortunate as it is in this time, I still think we have to be having those conversations with our employers. Like, if there's a keep in touch day, I'd really just like to know, not just because I might not want to come in that day, I might not want to be in the office, but I'll post the resource in there. But I think workplaces have a long way to go. If you've been through this and you feel strong enough, I would signpost your employers to this resource, and encourage your friends and family as well to signpost to their employers. And by doing this, hopefully we can spread the word about how to deal with it.
Thank you. I can see Karen has suggested maternityaction.org as a good resource for maternity rights as well. And as Janelle was saying, she'll post the information from SANS in the group. Just been looking through some of the questions. One question that I saw is, what advice would you give to someone who is being pressured to go back to work or feels that pressure, as in to say to their employee kind of thing?
Call HR straight away. I know sometimes HR are more corporate than personal, but I would call HR straight away. I would explain to them the situation, say that you are feeling pressured to come back to work. you are not ready, and can they please send you their policy on this? Because I think by that, then they know that you're serious, and they'll have to send you the policy on it. And if there's no policy, then you can ask them for the bereavement policy. But I think it's so challenging that sometimes in the toughest moment of your life, you have to be the person fighting for yourself. But that's what I would say to do, is to call HR, and then to call the other organisation that was just mentioned. I'll put the SANS link in, and just find out what your rights are, and then tell HR what your rights are if they're not informed. And if you have someone who can advocate on your behalf, and you're happy to give them permission to email HR on your behalf, then I would also do that. And as someone said, some workplaces do have employee resource groups. Your workplace might have a baby loss awareness group, and you might not even know about it because you haven't been through it. So that's another question I think to ask HR, if there is a resource group around baby loss, because some organisations have them too.
Thank you. Just to let everyone know that if you do have questions now, feel free again to write in the Q&A, also to raise your hand as well, and Laurie will unmute you. I have a question that I saw in the Q&A, and it asks how to educate people without negatively impacting their journey. I think that's a bit, it kind of sounds like it goes on the side of almost, again, trying to safeguard other people's feelings. Is there a way to educate people without negatively impacting their journey? Or is that just something is it about getting the education across and then?
Sorry, I think I'm speaking too much. Well, the one thing that I said to my friend who was pregnant the day, I just said, look, I am really happy for you, but I'm just still heartbroken for myself sometimes. And actually, I can't be the friend you need right now. You need a friend that you can just call up and tell exciting things that are happening in your pregnancy. And I'm just not in that space. And equally, I'm not sure that you really understand exactly how deep this runs for me. So I just think we just need some space. And I left that there in that sense, because I didn't feel it was my job to educate her on all of this. And also she's going through a time where she doesn't really want to hear it, but I also don't want to hear her news. So I think it was just really about just saying to her in the kindest way, like, look, this is the situation, this is the reality of it, we just need space. But I think if people are in a space where they're not pregnant, let's say, or something, and you just want to tell them more, I just do think Maternity Action, Tommy, SANS, they will all have links. And maybe it's just a look, I'm just going to send you this link, please read it or don't read it. But before we interact again, if you do want to interact again, please read it first. And I think if people have a heart for you and they love you, they should be willing to do that. If they're not, then I think that's just probably a sign that there's not a lot of space right now for that relationship, if you're feeling fragile.
And I was just going to make a comment, and the idea that women should keep silence because them talking about their experiences makes other people uncomfortable. I find that, unfortunately, is what fuels the taboo around pregnancy loss, and the honor should not be on the women not sharing their experiences just because someone else is feeling uncomfortable. Like Janelle said, we should create those spaces where people can share their experiences, and also the people who find themselves in that space should have an acceptance that it is perfectly okay, and it's not about me, but it's about someone else sharing their experience and holding that space, no matter how uncomfortable it is. So it saddens me that the onus is on women who have experienced the loss to not share their experiences because other people find those conversations very uncomfortable, and we need to break that silence.
Yeah, definitely. I can see some hands raised. Let's see, is that something? Okay, so if the hands raised could be unmuted to speak. I have a question in the meantime that I've seen. Someone has asked, do you need qualifications to be able to set up a support group? They experienced a loss themselves and they was asking that.
I don't think you do, but I think it probably might be wise to plug into a charity who runs support groups and maybe speak to them, because there's probably training that people need. Going through a loss yourself doesn't always give you the right tools to be able to support others, and you need to also take care of yourself as well in that. So I would probably plug into a space where they can help you, train you, and also help you to run a group yourself.
So to add to that, which is brilliant advice to them, to be honest, because it's very easy to get caught up in things all for the sake of good and cause more damage. But another thing to do, which you don't have any qualification, you don't need any qualifications for, is to find a forum or on any baby loss charity where they do meetups, informal meetups. They might meet for walks, they might meet for coffee, and just really network and socialise with women going through the same things as you are. And then one thing can lead to another, and you can find out how to go about creating your own support group. Obviously, mental health is really talked about at the moment, and this links in very well with baby loss. And a journalist, Bryony Gordon, she set up Mental Health Matters, and she was suffering with mental health issues. So she just put it on social media one day, does anyone fancy going for a walk? And something like 3,000 people turned up at Clapham Common, So you can use your own platforms to do these things, and you don't need a qualification to do so. It's really important that you just keep yourself safe, and maybe you meet people through the right organisations.
Yeah, I agree. And literally, Mothers of Angels is something I set up because I wanted an organisation to kind of launch the afternoon tea for Mother's Day for women who have experienced loss. And I connected with Sands. I don't have qualifications as such myself. I have my experience, and I got to a place where I'm happy and feel comfortable to speak about my experience. And then I connected with Sands and other kind of charitable organizations to kind of help me to put this on. So yeah, I hope that helps. Are we able to unmute one of the raised hands yet, Laurie?
Yeah, so I've granted the permissions, but now whoever's been allowed just needs to unmute themselves.
Yeah, do you want to unmute yourself there? Hi, did you have a question for the panel? Okay. Okay, so I have a question here, which I think we've kind of touched already. And again, it was somebody who was asking about support to get back into work. But I think, would you say that the links that you've put in the chat are kind of going to help encourage women?
Yeah, I think the link in the chat that I put in should help you. There's a resource that can be given to employers, and then
study.
Are
I
able
was having problem going through Zoom, but it's okay now.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, so there's a link in there, and that should do it. Should you give to your employer. But if you are worried about going to work, I would try one of the befriending places or a support group, and I think someone there to kind of chat through what you're going through, or counselling about the anxiety about returning to work is something that I would do.
Okay, I've just seen a question. Someone's asked, how do I deal with still being so angry about my loss, especially anger directed at my partner and even myself?
I think it's really important that this particular person gets some help and some counselling, because you're going to feel a whole range of emotions. It's like a roller coaster. 1 minute you might be okay, the next minute you're angry, the next minute you're upset. One day you can cope, the next day you go to bed for the day. It's a whole roller coaster of emotions. You need to know, whoever sent this message, that it is completely normal and that your behaviour is not abnormal. But what's really important is that you get help and you seek some counselling, either through your GP or through your maternity unit or through a charitable organisation that will help you.
Yes, and also just to add, I saw another question regarding counselling. It was offered on the NHS, so after your loss, your bereavement midwife or somebody in the medical field around you would be able to refer you to a counsellor on the NHS. So it's not something that you have to pay for if you don't want to, if you're unable to pay for. Go to another question. Somebody has asked, what kind of support should you give a friend who has been through this? What do they need?
I think that's such an interesting question, because even though I've been through it, sometimes I have struggled when my friends have been through it, because no two people are the same, and you just know how desperate it feels and how sad it is. I think one of the things that I've tried to do with my friends is ask them, how are you doing today? Is a question that I ask, because that allows them the space to either talk about it if they want to or not. I think sometimes, because it's hard to judge someone's mood, you don't know if people do want to talk about it, you don't know whether to ask them. So sometimes by asking someone, how are you today? Or, is there anything you want to talk about? I think that gives them the space. If they are not going there, that means they might not want to go there. But then if they do go there, then it gives them the space to answer. So something I've tried to do is to really not try to anticipate what someone needs or what I think they need to do today, but allow them to make the choice by asking questions. So I think questions can actually be sometimes the most powerful thing when dealing with other people, rather than assuming, because I've been through it, well, I know exactly how you feel. You probably don't, because no two people are the same. So I think that's how I try to be there for people.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was just going to add on to what Janelle said, and I said, just holding that space and just being there, and someone knowing that you're just there holding space. I find that it is helpful, and totally agree on asking, how are you doing today? What is it that I can do to support you? I'm here if you need me. Feel free to reach out, but also giving them that space. That's really important.
There's a question. It's a hard question to kind of answer, but paraphrasing here, is there anything one can do to avoid a loss happening again?
That question is a very difficult question, and of course there's no guarantees with any future pregnancies, and no one can anticipate what may or may not happen. It's an unknown situation. The advice that I give women when I've been caring for them following the loss in the bereavement role is I advise them, coming towards the end of our contact, which there's no cut-off time. If I'm still talking to them for 1 year or what, that's fine. But I'm led by them, because sometimes I may call them and they're having a good day, and then I call and it makes it not such a good day because they feel an obligation to me to speak, when actually there's no obligation, but that's just how it goes. So I'm led by them. But what coming towards when I feel that they can call me if they need me, I just let them know that in future pregnancies, it's important that they contacted me. I make a joke of it, you can tell your partner first and then you need to tell me. And, we get them in for, and this is probably countrywide. We get them in for an early scan for reassurance, and we get them in for early screening, like timely screening, and extra appointments, consultant input, obstetrics, and make sure that everything's in place so that the process of them presenting for the first time in a new pregnancy is as hassle-free as possible and as emotionally copable as possible, because it's a massive thing. It's sort of like people report it's like they're pregnant and then they feel like they're just so guilty for the child that they've lost, and they feel like people are going to think they're replacing that child, or that pregnancy or that child no longer has any worth because they've got another baby coming and that's all that matters. And the emotional process they go through in a new pregnancy is so difficult. So So in terms of presenting with a pregnancy, everything is in place very early, and that's all I can reassure, and in the hope that if anything happens where you may need extra care or support or medical input, that you're in the system so that everybody knows everything about you. But of course, no one can predict what's going to happen in any pregnancy, and that's a really hard thing for anyone to face. But all we can do is support you through that.
And there are support groups. I remember when talking about this event with someone from the support group from SANS, I didn't even know that there were support groups, particularly for women who are pregnant again after their loss. So there are groups where you can engage and talk with other women, or if it's just that you're still seeing your counsellor or talking to your bereavement midwife, as Liz was saying, going through that journey. And I know that with my sister had a stillbirth at 40 weeks, and she's gone on to have 2 other children. And throughout her second and third pregnancy, she was having additional scans, and the care that she did receive from medical professionals was amazing.
I just would like to add on to what Liz has said, and just to say that 75% of women who miscarry will go on to have a healthy, normal pregnancy, and so with all the support that is put in place for future pregnancies, it just means that it reduces the risk of this happening. Unfortunately, we are not able to say with certainty that it will not happen again. You find that some people will go on to have 2 or 3 miscarriages, but again, the importance of one of the things that we speak to women about is the importance of, for example, some of the investigations that undertaken when you've had a pregnancy loss. So postmortem, talking about the different types of investigations that can be valuable, and we don't always have a definitive cause of death, but sometimes just being able to look at the picture and what happens means that we're able to put other things in place. And like Liz is saying, perhaps monitor closely. Do you need aspirin in your next pregnancy? What does the picture look like? And also understanding that, because I think there's an expectation when you have a postmortem, you will have an answer. And I say to my women, actually, not having a definitive cause is an answer in itself, because that postmortem has ruled out genetic conditions. It has ruled out maternal conditions. It just so happens that in this case, we don't have a definitive cause of what has happened, but all of these investigations and interventions are important, and they don't take away the chances of you never having a miscarriage, but it just means that we are paying a close attention and doing what we should do to minimize the risk of it happening again.
Thank you. I can see a few questions. I think there's a raised hand. Is there a hand still raised? Okay, so
yes, we have one hand raised. So I think it's Lee. Lee, if you are able to talk, then you just need to come off mute and share.
Okay, I suffered a miscarriage maybe 20 years ago, and I still find it hard to talk about. At that time, I don't think my GP or anyone referred me to any group. I kind of grieve in my own. So when I become a midwife, I was one of the SANS team with Karen on the ward, and I can relate to women. And most times they will come back and say, "Oh, you didn't say much, but you were there with me. You hold hands," and I just let them cry and just pat them on the back. Sometimes they said, not saying anything doesn't mean you don't care, but just holding the woman's hand, and that feeling doesn't go away even now. So looking after them in labor ward just bring back what had happened to me, and you will never forget. It's just giving us the training to know what to say to these women, to make them feel better, not forget, but to make them feel better. So moving on, what you've brought in this platform is amazing. And us professionals will take that on board when we're in the workplace, just to make it much better for the women. And I thank you all for bringing this on board. It's amazing, and it would help us as well. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you. We're coming up to the end of the session soon, so I'm very conscious of that. And I'm also very conscious that you have given a great deal of your morning to join into this event, so I really appreciate that. There's one question that I can see which I'm going to ask, and it's from Amanda. I had to TFMR at 14 weeks, and I feel that there was extra taboo around this as it was not a spontaneous miscarriage. Is there a different way to approach the conversation with people depending on the type of loss or gestation they experience, or should we just validate their loss and say, I'm sorry?
I think we should just validate the loss and say, I'm sorry. I think a TFMR is, it's not a choice in that sense. And so it is very much something that for medical reasons, advice, and many mothers, of course, follow that advice, and rightly so. So I think we should just be taking that as a loss. I think sometimes it's really funny, isn't it, how we feel we owe people so many explanations. Sometimes, oh, well, it's because of this, or this happened, or that happened, and actually it's a miscarriage. Your loss is valid. The way you feel is valid, and it's something still that has kind of happened to you. And so I just think, we should absolutely just validate it and say, I'm sorry. And I hope that if you, after your TFMR, you never feel like you have to explain all the ins and outs to everybody else, because actually you really don't.
I agree with you, Janelle. Just wanted to add to that the women that we care for, these women particularly feel as if they report they feel really vulnerable to being judged, and they suffer tremendously post-delivery, and they deserve and need to be acknowledged in exactly the same way as all losses. They've lost their baby, and that's the important thing to hang on to, and they need a lot of support, and it's really important that we all acknowledge that.
Thank you. I can see we have a raised hand from Anne. Due to time, this will be our last question for the morning. Are you able to unmute Anne, Laurie?
Yes, Anne's unmuted.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you very much for this platform. My name is Anne. I'm a midwife, and I've made few comments, and I just wanted to add on to what the last person said. Now, a loss must never be defined by someone else. I think we should acknowledge a loss, whatever the woman is going through, regardless of what gestation, what it is our loss. And we must encourage women to see their loss as their loss. Nobody else should have the energy or power to define it for them. And we as healthcare professionals, especially for me, I encourage them and just acknowledge that loss for them. I found out that it really helps, regardless of the gestation, regardless of what happened, regardless of how. The fact that we acknowledge it and have acknowledged that it's their baby. Something as simple as making a mistake and saying, oh, fetus. No, it's not a fetus, but it's their baby. And you have to acknowledge it that, yes, it's a baby and it's a loss for them. So loss must never be defined. We shouldn't define it for them, for the individuals. We should just acknowledge their reality and be sensitive with everything. We don't have to rush in and talk. We don't have to be quick to talk. We don't have to be slow. We should just read between the lines. As healthcare professionals, I think we need to equip ourselves to be able to have that higher sensitivity and to be able to read between the lines, because that really sets them off for the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. I can see someone said, well said, indeed, well said. So we're going to, just wanted to ask the panelists if they had any final comments or anything to say before we close out with the interview of OBLE.
Yeah,
I just really want to say thank you to everyone that's taken time to listen, and moreover that's had the strength to log in to this morning, and I really appreciate it, and any feedback through Tara would be really useful for us to go forward with providing care for women and families like yourselves. Thank you.
I echo what my colleague Liz has said. Thank you for everyone who has shared their experiences on this platform, and I am very sorry that for your loss and you had to go through that. But I think the closing remark for me, it's interesting that even while we're having this conversation, when I look at the number of participants, it's probably maybe I've recognized one name that is a male. And so the question is, how do we get these conversations? How do we get men to engage in these conversations? Because I think that is the only way we'll get them where we need to get them. And unfortunately, it so happens that the conversations that are held by men or brought about by men are the ones that seem to end up having an effect and a change. And so perhaps is thinking about how do we get men engaged in these conversations so that we can make that change that we need.
I want to say thank you to Tara for creating this space. Thank you. I think all the panelists are amazing, and also to everyone who's given a comment. I know sometimes it's so hard, and then someone said they're really glad to know they're not alone. So I think if I had a final thought for everyone, you're not alone. There are many, many, many women, sadly, who have walked the journey that you've walked and who will walk it. And so there is spaces for us to be together and to connect. And I think if you are feeling isolated, I would join in with one of the amazing organizations that offer spaces for support, where people who have been through the same situation as you, where you can congregate and talk together. And I hope that everyone has a day where you take care of yourself and your mental health for the rest of this day as well, because I think that's going to be really important after a conversation like this.
Thanks, Janelle. I can see Laurie's shared some information for everyone. If you wanted to reach out and get in touch and call some people, there is information of some of the main charities in the UK, SANS, who are supporting this Sunday Tea event, and also the founders of Baby Loss Awareness Week, Tommy's, and the Miscarriage Association. If you wanted to connect with Mothers of Angels on social media, then our Instagram handle is mothersofangels_host_Sunday Tea. And on Facebook, we're at Mothers of Angels Host Sunday Tea. And I just wanted to take this time to say thank you to everyone who registered and dialed into the call, because again, we don't take for granted how difficult it might have been for some people to log on and to join in, and also kind of be faced with this topic during your grief, and whatever stage you're at in your grief, then I just want to say thank you. And I also, again, which is the heart of Mothers of Angels and Sunday's Tea, want to say how courageous and how amazing you are. Because as Janelle was saying as well, if you are here and you're living and you're breathing, there's a purpose to you being here. There's a reason for you here. And I just want to celebrate and say how amazing you are. To have gone through, to experience, and to every day be going through, to be living with your loss and still doing life. I just think you're an amazing woman. You are amazing women. So just wanted to say thank you for logging into the call. Please do stay in touch. I and probably some of the other panelists will be hanging around to answer any questions or comments that we haven't got round to being able to answer as yet. And I also wanted to thank the panel as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to join in on the call, to share your stories, and to also give advice as well. We are hoping to do something towards Christmas time. So if you follow us or stay in touch on social media, you'll be able to hear more that way as well. So yeah, thank you again. Please feel free to stay on and to hear the interview from OBLE. No trigger warnings from me regarding that. And yeah, look after yourself, really, from the bottom of my heart. You are not alone. There are communities around. There is social media, which is actually becoming a really powerful force of encouragement for people. You're not alone. And yeah, lots of love to you all. Thank you.
My name is OBLA. I have two children, Tetokwe, who's 3, and Nayele, who is 6 months. I also have 2 little girls, Sapphire Ray, who passed away when she was 21 weeks, and Isabella Ray, who passed away when she was 3 weeks.
And whenever people ask you how many children do you have, do you always introduce your angel babies, or do you not sometimes? Or
It really does depend. It depends. If it's just a general question, or someone's passed, or someone's just being nice in a cafe, I always just say, oh no, I've got 2, or is she your first? Be like, no, I've got a toddler. But sometimes people ask me in a certain tone. So I always say to them, they always say, is this your first? I say, no, it's my 4th. And they look at me like, oh, and I'm like, do you really want to know the story? Should we go any further? And they always look at you like, oh, I'm okay. I'm like, okay then. Okay, I miscarried with Sapphire Ray when I was 21 weeks pregnant at work. I was sitting behind my desk and I just felt a gush of water. And I thought, oh, what's that? Popped up to the loo and I couldn't see anything. But when I wiped, I saw blood. So I quickly just grabbed my coat and just left the building. 24 hours later, I gave birth. It was a very strange experience, something obviously I didn't plan for, but I got through it. It wasn't easy. I did a lot of gym work. I took a very long time off for work, and I'm really grateful for my workplace actually. I must have taken at least 3 months off work, and they're really understanding, but I needed that time for myself. I got pregnant 7 years later with Isabella, and this time I knew what my problems were. So I went straight to the GP and explained the situation and told them that I was going to need a cervical stitch no later than 16 weeks.
And what was your problem, or you say you knew what your problems were?
Okay, so what happened was, once I'd given birth to Sapphire, I had a postnatal meeting. I still don't know what the actual name for it is, but it's a consultation with a consultant and a doctor, and they go through what happened, what went wrong, and things to learn from. And they explained to me that, you know, looking at my file and my past history, I was perfectly healthy. And the only thing that it could possibly be is a weak cervix, which they actually call an incompetent cervix. But I like to say that no part of me is incompetent. It just didn't work to its fullest ability. That's it. It's not incompetent. So they told me that, you know, going forward, what would have to be done is I'd have to reinforce my cervix to be able to carry the baby, which basically means having a surgical stitch inserted, which there are 3 types. There's the one that just goes in as standard, just wraps around the cervix. There's one that goes in a bit higher up the cervix, and then there's one that they call an abdominal stitch, which they put in as a C-section. So they literally cut you open as a C-section and they stitch right at the top of your cervix, and that stays in permanently unless you want it removed, which would also have to be removed via C-section. They only put in the abdominal stitch though in severe cases, because and also if you don't want many children, so if you just wanted the 1 or maybe 2, they'd put it in. But if you wanted 3 or 4 children, they wouldn't put it in, because every time they put it in, they have to go back in through the same scar, which could cause problems in the long run. So I knew this because the hospital had told me, and I went forward for my 3rd pregnancy with this information. So I went in one week for my appointment with the sonographer, and her face drained of colour, and she said to me, your cervix is open and we're going to have to send you upstairs to antenatal. So I popped upstairs, and I was put into a cubicle and explained, they explained to me that they were going to send me home for 5 weeks, and they explained that they were going to send me home and bring me back in 5 weeks' time. I refused to go home because, as the scan has shown and the sonographer had explained, my cervix was open. Why was I going to go home for 5 weeks? The baby's head was engaged. I refused to go home. And one of the care workers, I don't know if she was a care worker or a support worker or a midwife, but she was like, don't worry, darling, I'm going to go and speak to them. So off she went, and a different doctor came to see me and explained the situation. And I said to her, listen, I'm not going home. I refuse. You're going to have to put that stitch in today. Long story short, that stitch was put in that day. I then went home and took it really easy. And I mean, I didn't think I could take it any easier, but I really did. I came back the following day for an appointment, and I was kept in from that day. The day I arrived until 6 weeks, when I eventually gave birth again. So 6 weeks later, I gave birth. It was in the evening. I sneezed. I literally sneezed. It was like a cartoon, and my waters broke. And I knew my waters had broken, but it was like I went into denial. So I called the nurses and said, oh, I seem to be leaking. And they were like, oh, okay. So we were all playing the same game. So, all right, we'll just pop you downstairs. I was like, all right then. And then when I got downstairs, they were like, but we can see the baby's coming. No, sorry, your membranes are bulging. So the baby was born. They handed the baby to her dad. At this point, I was just so angry. Like, I've never been that angry with somebody else, or should I say, maybe a medical professional like that in my life. The anger was so real and so present, but I had to try and control it. And later that day, when the baby was in her cold cot next to me, and I just couldn't get my head around why nobody helped, nobody offered to help, and there was no one I could ask for help. And I remember, I'll never forget, there was a midwife called Hope. I'll never forget, I mean, what the odds? Her name was Hope. I will never forget that. And I remember saying to her, there must be someone in this country that can help me with this situation, because otherwise I'm just going to keep miscarrying. There must be someone that can help me. And she said, oh, hold on a second, I'll pop out and ask. She popped out, she came back, and she said to me, oh, Tommy's. And I was like, sorry? And she was like, yeah, Tommy's. They help with preterm labour. Within a week, I received my letter from St. Thomas's preterm clinic, and I was invited to meet Professor Andrew Shannon and the head research midwife, Debbie, and popped down to see them both and explained to them what had happened. And Professor Andrew Shannon was just the most warm and welcoming, and he just person I'd ever come across, and he really put my mind at rest. Debbie too. They worked as a very good team, and he explained to me that I could have children. There was no question about whether or not I could have children. The question was, how many children did I want? And the reason he asked that question was because of the different types of stitch that were available. Once I told him I wanted 3 to 4 children, he then decided it was more of a process of elimination. So I couldn't have the abdominal stitch. Well, I could if I only wanted 1 or 2, but because I wanted 3 or 4, it wasn't really feasible, because we'd have to re-enter through the same cut over and over again. And one thing I would like to highlight is that the meeting at Tommy's was all through the NHS. I didn't have to pay for it, and I will forever be grateful for the NHS for this service, because when I think about my fellow sisters in abroad who do have to pay for it, you have to be really grateful that we do have this service available to us for free. And I really have to emphasize that, you know, it is very traumatic when you lose one child, never mind multiple children. the pain is the same, but again and again and again. So to be able to have a service such as what the preterm clinic at St Thomas's offer for free shouldn't be taken for granted at all.
So the theme for Baby Loss Awareness Week this year is looking after yourself and well-being. What did you do to look after yourself during your time of grief?
With with Sapphire, my first miscarriage, I lived in the gym. I literally just lived in the gym. It wasn't something that I planned to do, but her dad did say to me, why don't you just go to the gym? And first of all, I thought he was being quite insulting. I thought, was he trying to say that? Like, why should I? And he was like, no, just go to the gym. Like, you know, just do it, just go, because he's a gym body. So I suppose from his point of view, he was just like the gym's the best place to be. So I spent a good part of a year in the gym. I got a personal trainer and I worked out non-stop. I was in the gym every single day, and it wasn't to lose weight, which obviously did happen because you're building muscle, but it was just so nice to plug out all the noise around me and just run and just to be by myself. I used to walk to the gym, walk home, work out, come home, eat, work out. And it just became my thing. And do you know what? I have recommended it to every single person that's lost a child to just go to the gym. Everyone that's trying to have a baby, that's trying to get their body ready to have a baby, I've always said to everyone, just go to the gym. It's not to lose weight. It's that weight loss is a byproduct, but it just centers you and it just clears your mind. And even if you start crying, I mean, you can just pretend it's sweat. But there's just something in being in that gym, because nobody cares about what you're doing in the gym. If you go to a gym, not necessarily a health club, although I do love my health clubs, it's about just breaking that sweat, and just any kind of anger you have, any kind of upset you have, any kind of hurt, you can literally just run it out, or you can swing it out with a kettlebell or whatever it is, and you just feel so good for it when you leave.